I knew something was wrong the moment I opened the cabinet and saw the bottle wasn't where I had left it. At my age, you learn the shape of your own days the way you learn the outline of your own hands. And when something shifts, just a few inches, just enough to whisper that someone touched what shouldn't be touched, you feel it like a cold finger along your spine. My heart medication was gone, not misplaced. Gone. And the silence of the kitchen felt heavier than its absence. Dana called it an accident. She said it lightly, too lightly, as if my pills were no different from a spoon she'd dropped behind the counter. "You probably forgot you finished the bottle, Margaret," she told me, her voice all warm sugar over something harder. "At your age, it happens." She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. She rarely does. And when she finally looked up, it was with that soft smile she uses when she wants me to feel like a guest in my own life. I didn't argue. I've lived long enough to know that the loudest person is not always the one who wins. Sometimes the truth grows slowly, like a bruise, darkening underneath the skin before anyone else can see it. So I nodded, and I thanked her for stopping by, and I folded the small tremor in my hands beneath the table where she couldn't witness it. She hovered a moment, as if checking the room for something she might have missed, then kissed my cheek, with lips too cool for someone so young. After she left, I sat alone at the table, listening to the kettle clicking as it cooled. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Of course things go missing. Of course I forget sometimes. But forgetting feels a certain way. It has a texture, a softness. This felt sharp, intentional. A piece moved on a board I hadn't agreed to play on. I tried to rest that afternoon, but my body kept reminding me of its need for those pills, the faint heaviness in the ribs, the pulse working harder than it should. I counted the hours, then the minutes, waiting until the pharmacy reopened. It's only 3 blocks from my house, a quiet walk I know by heart, though lately I've had to slow at the corner where the pavement dips. When I reached the counter, the pharmacist greeted me with that gentle kindness people reserve for the very young or the very old. I suppose I fall into one of those categories now. "I need a refill," I told her. "My medication seems to be missing." She typed something, her brows pulling together. "Missing? But Ms. Hale, it was canceled." "Canceled?" The word didn't make sense at first. "No, dear, I didn't cancel anything." She turned the screen a little, not enough for me to read, but enough for me to see the timestamp glowing in bright blue. "It was canceled through the online portal. 3 days ago." 3 days ago, Dana was here. She had come by unannounced, insisting on helping me organize my kitchen cabinets. She'd moved things I didn't ask her to move. She'd lingered over that same drawer longer than it should take to straighten a stack of napkins. 3 days ago. I felt the room tilt slightly, not from weakness, but from clarity. A quiet, unwelcome clarity. Still, I thanked the pharmacist, promised I'd look into it, and walked home slowly, carrying each step like a secret. I didn't want to believe anything yet. Belief is a dangerous thing. Once it forms, it doesn't leave you the same. Back in my kitchen, the late sun lay across the table in thin, fragile lines. I sat down, folded my hands, and let the truth settle beside me. Not full, not final, but present enough to keep me awake longer than I preferred. I watched the light fade until the room grew dim, and only then did I finally stand, feeling a little older than I had that morning. Dana came by the next morning with a bag of groceries she hadn't asked whether I needed. She does that often now, arriving with things I never requested and calling it help. I've learned that when someone insists on being indispensable, It is rarely for your benefit." She set the bag on the counter with a bright cheerfulness that felt rehearsed, her bracelets chiming like tiny warnings every time she moved her hands. "I thought you might be low on a few things," she said, placing apples in a neat line as if my kitchen were a showroom. "You looked tired yesterday. Did you rest?" I watched her, the way she avoided looking at the cabinet where the medicine should have been. "I slept enough," I answered. "But I went to the pharmacy." Her fingers tightened on an apple before she forced her smile back into place. "Oh? Was everything fine?" "They said the refill had been canceled," I said quietly. I wanted to see her reaction more than I wanted any explanation. It's remarkable what the face reveals before the words catch up. A flicker passed across her eyes. Recognition, I think, before she smoothed it over. "Oh, Margaret," she sighed, stepping closer. "That system is confusing. You probably clicked something without realizing. It happens, especially online. Especially, well," she gestured vaguely, the way young people do when they want to mention your age without saying the number. "But I'll help you manage it. We don't want any mix-ups." "We." She always says we when she means I. I told her I'd appreciate that, and sat at the table while she bustled around the room, opening drawers she didn't need to open, moving boxes that didn't need moving. She narrates her movements as if talking to a child, explaining, instructing, patting the air between us like she's soothing a nervous animal. "I'm just trying to give you some structure," she said once. Structure. As if my life were sagging and she had come to shore it up. The truth is simpler. She likes to see what she can control. When Michael came after work, he kissed my forehead and said I looked pale. He always means well, that's the trouble. Good men with soft heads have been the undoing of many women before me. He asked if I'd been taking my medication regularly, and Dana stepped behind him with a look that said she had already written the answer for me. "She's been a little confused," Dana murmured. "I think she forgot a few doses. It's normal at her age." Michael's face softened with that worried sympathy that breaks my heart more than any insult could. "Mom, you should let us help more," he said. "There's no need to do everything alone." I nodded because arguing would only make me look like the thing Dana was trying to paint me as. Fragile, forgetful, slipping. I have never slipped a day in my life. I've grieved, I've aged, I've slowed, but my mind still holds its shape. Yet the more she repeated her little stories, the misplaced mug, the phone I supposedly left in the refrigerator, the appointment she swore I forgot, the more Michael accepted them as truth. They were too small to defend, too harmless to confront. That's how these things start, with details too trivial to fight for. After they left that evening, the house felt overly quiet. I sat by the kitchen window watching the dusk settle over the street, that gentle blue hour when everything softens. I thought of my husband, how he used to rest his hand on mine when I worried. "People show you who they are in small ways," he used to say. Not in speeches, in footsteps. I remember that now. And I think Dana has been showing me her footsteps for quite some time. I made myself a cup of tea, though it tasted dull the way tea does when something heavier is on your mind. I wrote down the day's events in a small notebook I keep tucked behind the bread box. Not because I doubt myself, but because I know others will. I noted her words, her movements, the exact minute she hesitated when I mentioned the pharmacy. When I closed the notebook, the night had deepened. The house seemed to exhale around me. I sat there for a while longer, listening to the quiet, letting it settle over me like a shawl that had been worn by many years. Then I turned off the light. By the end of that week, the heaviness in my chest had grown familiar, almost like an old visitor returning uninvited. Not dangerous yet, just persistent enough to remind me that something in my routine had been disturbed. When your body depends on a thin white pill to keep its rhythm steady, even a missed dose feels like someone tugging a thread inside you. Each morning, I sat at the table and waited for the first minutes of the day to tell me how well my heart intended to behave. I kept notes now, quietly, carefully. I wrote the date, the time Dana arrived, the drawers she opened, the tone she used when speaking of me in the third person while I was still in the room. I wrote how many pills remained. I wrote the moment I noticed the bottle sitting at a slightly different angle, as if it had been disturbed and then returned too quickly. These details look small when written down, but living inside them is another matter. A life can unravel from the smallest seams. Michael came on Thursday evening with a bag of takeout, his attempt at being attentive. He always brings too much food, as if hunger could be fixed by quantity. "Mom, you didn't sound yourself on the phone," he said, setting the dishes out like he used to when he was a boy trying to impress me with burnt toast and jam. "Are you taking your meds consistently? Dana said you seemed unsure yesterday." There it was again, her voice coming out of his mouth. "I'm taking what I have," I replied. "And I know exactly what I do each morning, Michael." He hesitated, a crease forming between his brows. "I just worry you're overwhelmed. There's a lot to manage at your age." She had taught him that phrase. It fit too neatly, too smoothly, like a coat she had draped over him until he believed it was his. We ate together, though my appetite was thin. He talked about work, long hours, the way time slipped through his hands. I listened, remembering the years when his problems had been schoolyard troubles, bruised knees, lost homework. Back then, he trusted me with everything. Now he trusted Dana with everything, including what he thought of me. When he left, he hugged me the way one hugs someone fragile. Quick, careful, as if afraid of breaking a bone. And then he was gone, leaving the house in its familiar stillness. That night, I woke twice, feeling my pulse racing before it settled again. I sat upright in bed, breathing slowly, reminding myself I was still here. There is a particular fear that comes with being old. Not death itself, but the idea that someone might usher you toward it before your time, all while claiming it was for your well-being. In the morning, I called my doctor's office, not because I believed they would have answers, but because I needed something anchored in reason. The receptionist told me my chart showed irregular refill activity, but insisted I must have changed something online. Everyone speaks so confidently about what an elderly woman must have done. They forget we have lived entire decades before they learned to tie their own shoes. After breakfast, I sat by the window with my notebook open on my lap. I wrote down my symptoms: slight shortness of breath, occasional dizziness, the faint tremor in my fingers. I wrote the way Dana frowned when she noticed me writing. She asked once what I kept in that notebook, and I told her simply, "Things I don't want to forget." She laughed politely, but her eyes tightened the way they do when she is trying to decide how much of me she can shape. By Saturday, I had formed a quiet plan. I needed to see the pharmacy records again, not just the confirmation of the cancellation. I wanted the full history. I wanted every timestamp, every access point. People think we become naive with age, but I have lived long enough to recognize patterns in human behavior even when they try to hide beneath kindness. Before leaving the house, I checked the medicine cabinet once more. The bottle sat there, too full, too untouched. Dana had brought a new one to help me stay on track, though the pharmacy insisted no refill had been issued. I unscrewed the cap and counted each pill one by one. Then I wrote that number in my notebook, closed it, and slipped it in my handbag. The sky was overcast as I walked to the pharmacy. The air smelled like rain that couldn't decide whether to fall. I moved slowly, steadying myself on the railing by the crossing. The pharmacist recognized me as soon as I stepped inside. Her kindness made my throat tighten more than any worry had. "I think I need to see the log," I told her. She nodded, not asking why, and I stood there waiting, feeling the breath in my chest shift, knowing the truth was finally beginning to take shape. The pharmacist led me to the small consultation room in the back, the one with soft chairs and a print of wildflowers on the wall, as if gentleness could soften whatever was spoken inside. She closed the door and sat across from me, her hands folded in a way that told me she already knew this conversation would be delicate. Age teaches you to read hands as well as faces. Hands rarely lie. "I pulled the full activity log," she said quietly. "I wanted to make sure everything was accurate before I showed you." She turned the monitor toward me. A simple screen, lines of text, dates, timestamps, my name at the top. So ordinary, and yet each line felt like a needle sliding under my skin. The cancellation was there, of course, but not only that. It showed 3 login attempts the week before. 2 successful, 1 failed, and all of them performed from a device that wasn't mine. "I don't use the online portal," I said. "I wouldn't even know where to begin." "I know," she answered. "That's why I checked twice." One of the timestamps caught my eye. The afternoon Dana had stopped by with her cheerful insistence on reorganizing my cabinets. The same visit when she lingered near the drawer where I kept my paperwork. I remembered the way she had stood behind me while I washed a cup, her phone buzzing, her hands typing quickly before she slipped it into her pocket again. I felt something in my chest tighten. Not fear, not yet, but a recognition so sharp it nearly steadied me. I thanked the pharmacist, asked for a printed copy of the log, and placed it carefully in my handbag. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing in the faint scent of alcohol wipes and paper. The world didn't change, but the way I saw it did. When I walked home, the air felt heavier, the sky low with a gray that pressed close to the roofs. I moved slowly, not from weakness, but from purpose. Age doesn't take everything. It leaves you a certain clarity, a way of seeing people without the fog of hope. By the time I reached my house, my steps had settled into something calm and deliberate. Dana arrived an hour later. She didn't knock loudly. She never does. She likes to enter as if she already belongs. She stepped inside, brushing past me with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought I'd check on you," she said. "You looked a little off yesterday." I watched her remove her coat, her movements smooth, controlled, as if she were stepping into a story she had rehearsed. She asked about my sleep, my appetite, my little spells. She tilted her head with practiced concern. Each question felt like a small, gentle test, as if she were trying to measure how much I understood of my own life. "I went to the pharmacy today," I said. Her hands froze mid-gesture. It was the smallest pause, but enough. Then she recovered, nodding with exaggerated relief. "Good. Did they sort out your confusion? Technology can be complicated." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for my notebook on the table and opened it slowly. Her eyes flicked to it, just for a moment, then away. They gave me the activity log, I said. Quite interesting, really. Her smile faltered, then returned, thinner this time. Oh, Margaret, those systems make mistakes. You shouldn't worry yourself. Sometimes they copy old data from... She kept talking, but her words blurred into a soft, meaningless hum. I was watching her face, not listening to her excuses, the tightening at the corner of her jaw, the dryness at her throat when she swallowed, the faint, defensive shift of her shoulders. People try to mask their truths, but the body always betrays intention. I closed the notebook. I know what I do and don't do, I said, and I know what I would never do. Silence settled between us, thin as paper but sharp as glass. Then, just as quickly, she laughed. A too bright sound. You're overthinking things. Michael worries you're stressed, and I agree. Maybe you should let us take on more decisions. Just until you feel steadier. There it was, the offer disguised as care. A step toward dependence she would call support. I felt a strange calm then, as if something inside me aligned. The truth was no longer gathering. It had arrived. After she left, I sat at the table and spread the printed logs before me. I traced each timestamp with my finger, the way one might follow the stitches of a wound. The light faded slowly outside, drawing long shadows across the page. I knew then that understanding was no longer enough. I would have to act, and act carefully. But that would come in time. For that evening, I allowed myself a moment of stillness, letting the quiet of my own home settle around me like something reclaimed. The kettle clicked as it cooled, and I listened to it until the sound dissolved into the evening air. Michael called the next morning before I'd even finished my tea. His voice had that worried softness he uses when he isn't sure whether he's checking on me or checking on what Dana told him to check. Mom, Dana said you seemed unsettled yesterday. Is everything all right? Unsettled? She chose her words carefully, as she always does. They sound harmless until you realize they're little seeds planted to grow into doubts about your mind. I've seen that strategy before. Years ago, when my sister-in-law wanted control over my father-in-law's finances. It starts with a tone, then a suggestion, then a story told twice until it becomes truth for those who want to believe it. I'm perfectly aware of myself, I told him, more aware than some might like. He gave a soft laugh, the kind that tries to smooth over discomfort. No one's questioning you, Mom. We just want to help. Sometimes help is just a prettier word for intrusion, but I didn't say it. Instead, I told him I was fine, and that I'd call if I needed anything. He accepted that, or pretended to, then hung up with a sigh that lingered in my ear long after the line went quiet. The house felt heavy that morning. The light coming through the windows looked worn, tired, as if even the sun hesitated to stay too long. I moved slowly through the rooms, letting my fingers brush the furniture. I needed to feel something steady, something untouched by other hands. When I reached the medicine cabinet, I opened it with more care than usual. The bottle stood exactly where I'd placed it after counting the pills. I checked the seal again. I counted again. Nothing had changed, but my trust had shifted. That mattered more. Around noon, Dana appeared without warning. She didn't even pretend this time. No groceries, no bright greeting. Just a quick step into the doorway and a glance at the table, at my notebook, sitting beside my reading glasses. Her eyes paused there a fraction too long. Margaret, I was in the neighborhood, she began, though she lives 20 minutes away. I thought I'd check on you. How are you feeling today? Steady enough, I answered. And you? She smiled, but the corners of her mouth were tight. "You know, Michael worries. He said you sounded confused about your medication again." Again. A repetition meant to build a narrative she could later insist had always been true. Clever in a small way, cruel in a larger one. "I'm managing quite well," I said. "I wrote everything down." Dana glanced at the notebook again. I saw the calculation flicker behind her eyes. Not fear, not yet, but caution. It reminded me of a fox that realizes the henhouse has more locks than it expected. "Oh, you don't need to exhaust yourself writing every little thing," she said lightly, sitting down across from me. "Just rely on us. We're here to take care of the complicated parts." I looked at her hands. Beautiful, manicured, steady. Hands of someone accustomed to shaping things their way. "Life only becomes complicated," I said, "when someone starts rearranging it." She blinked, then gave a small laugh as if I'd told a joke. But her cheeks had flushed. "I'm just trying to help. Michael thinks it would be easier if he handled your prescriptions from now on." Handled. Another polite word for removed, redirected, taken out of my reach. "I've taken care of myself for many years," I replied. "I intend to continue doing so." She shifted, restless now. She looked toward the cabinet, then back at me. "Margaret, if you're struggling, you can tell us. There's no shame in admitting when things are slipping." Slipping. That was the word she wanted. A word that could later be repeated to doctors, to pharmacists, to anyone who might wonder why an old woman's medicine kept disappearing. But I didn't rise to the bait. I simply folded my hands on the table like someone with nothing to hide. "I know exactly what is happening in this house." A silence stretched between us, thin and brittle. Then she stood quickly, smoothing her coat. "Well, if you need anything, call me, or call Michael. Please don't try managing everything alone." She left too quickly, almost tripping over the threshold. When the door closed, I opened my notebook and wrote down every detail. The color of her cheeks, the tremor at her wrist, the way her eyes darted to the cabinet. Writing steadied me. It reminded me that truth recorded is truth protected. Later, as the sun lowered itself behind the houses across the street, I sat with a warm blanket around my shoulders and let the quiet settle in. I didn't feel frightened. Not anymore. Awareness has a strange way of strengthening a person, even an old woman with a tired heart. I poured myself a glass of water and held it a moment before drinking, watching the light catch on its surface. I knew things now that couldn't be unwritten. I woke the next morning with a heaviness in my limbs that wasn't quite illness, but wasn't peace either. It was the weight of knowing too much and not being able to say it yet. Silence has a texture when you're older. It presses on your ribs, asking you to decide whether to break it or carry it a little longer. I chose to carry it. I wanted to see more. People reveal themselves fully only when they believe you aren't watching. I moved slowly through the house, checking the cabinet first. Everything was exactly as I had left it. That, in itself, was unusual. Dana usually found a reason to stop by after any moment that might have unsettled her. When she didn't appear by mid-morning, I understood. She was regrouping, planning. A person like Dana never leaves a loose thread unattended. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the neighbor's dog trot up and down the walkway. Small, steady things are a comfort at my age. The street was quiet except for a delivery truck and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Nothing dramatic, nothing dark. And yet the stillness around me felt like the pause before someone speaks a truth they don't wish to say aloud. Around noon, I heard footsteps outside. Soft, hesitant. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Not Dana's sharp, confident press. A single, tentative one. When I opened the door, she stood there with a container of soup she claimed she'd made for me. Her face was overly bright, eyes quick and searching. She was looking for signs. Fear, confusion, surrender. I made sure she found none. "I thought you could use something warm," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You didn't sound yourself this morning when Michael called." "I sounded like someone who had just woken up," I replied. At 76. Mornings come slowly. She laughed politely, but watched me with careful eyes. "I'm glad you're resting. You've been scattered lately." There it was again. That subtle rewriting of my reality, her voice dipping gently into the cracks she hoped to widen. But I stayed still, letting her attempt slide off me like water. She moved toward the kitchen, glancing around the way one checks a room after suspecting something has shifted. Her gaze landed on my notebook for half a second, quick but not quick enough to hide her discomfort. "I've been tidying," she offered. "Maybe I should help you keep track of things. Medication, appointments, just until you feel more centered." "I feel centered now," I said. She paused, then placed the soup on the counter with an overly careful gesture. "Michael thinks you're overwhelmed. He worries you're trying to manage too much." I watched her hands. They were steady today. Too steady, in fact. Performatively calm. "Michael worries because you tell him there is something to worry about," I said softly. Her head snapped up, just a fraction, and I saw the irritation she tried so hard to keep tucked away. "I'm only trying to help," she said. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Harder for whom? I wondered. But I didn't ask. Instead, I walked to the cabinet and opened it, letting the door swing wide so she could see the bottle, the notebook beside it, the order of things she had once believed she controlled. I didn't accuse her. I simply let the truth sit between us, quiet and patient. Her jaw tightened, but she smiled. "You know, Margaret, if you ever start forgetting again, we should talk about having Michael take over." "I haven't forgotten anything," I answered. "Not one thing." For the first time, she didn't reply. She just turned, picked up her purse, and left the soup untouched on the counter. After the door closed, I sat at the table and breathed slowly until the room settled around me again. Not from fear, no, from certainty. Something in her expression had shifted today, a crack in her confidence. And through that crack, I could finally see the shape of her intentions more clearly. I wrote everything down, every gesture and glance, and when my hand began to ache, I rested it on the table and looked at the small circle of light on the floor where the sun had slipped through the blinds. The truth was no longer hiding. The next morning, I woke with a kind of resolve that didn't rush or shout. It simply settled over me the way dawn settles over a quiet street. Soft, but unmistakable. My heart felt steadier, not because my body had improved, but because my mind had reached a place of clarity that fear can no longer disturb. Awareness is its own medicine, I suppose. I dressed slowly, choosing the coat with deep pockets. I slipped my notebook into one, my reading glasses into the other. Then I walked to the pharmacy again. Not because anything new had happened, but because truth deserves to be handled in full light, not in glimpses. I wanted to see every entry, every action someone had taken in my name. The pharmacist recognized me right away. Her face softened with concern, but she didn't treat me like someone fragile. She invited me back into the small consultation room and printed the full activity history, this time including older logs. "I thought you might want the complete picture," she said. The pages were warm from the printer when she handed them to me. I held them carefully, the way one holds a letter from someone you thought you understood, but never fully did. Line after line revealed the same pattern. Logins at times I wasn't near a computer, cancellations I hadn't made, and attempts that aligned with days Dana had been at my house. Her presence had always felt intrusive, but now it felt documented. "Is this safe with you?" the pharmacist asked quietly. "It's safer with me than without it," I said. On the walk home, I didn't hurry. The sky was pale, washed clean by last night's rain. The sidewalk glistened faintly, and the trees seemed to whisper in that way old things whisper to each other when no one's listening. I thought about how many women my age have lived through betrayals of all kinds, quiet ones, public ones, the ones wrapped in false concern. We learn to endure, but endurance is not the same as surrender. I reached my house just as a breeze picked up, carrying the distant sound of children playing somewhere down the street. That sound steadied me more than anything. Life continues, even when ours feels narrowed. Inside, I placed the pharmacy logs on the table and smoothed them flat. There was something powerful in seeing the truth laid out in ink. Age may take strength from the muscles, but it sharpens the eyes for dishonesty. Just after noon, as if summoned by the quiet, Dana arrived. She didn't knock politely. She knocked softly, strategically. When I opened the door, her first glance flicked over my shoulder toward the table. She was looking for evidence, though she'd never admit it. "Margaret," she said, her voice too sweet. "I've been thinking about yesterday. I think we got off on the wrong foot." I stepped aside, letting her in. Not because I welcomed her presence, but because I wanted her to see what I had chosen for her to see. Her eyes found the papers immediately. She froze. Not long, but long enough. "What's this?" she asked. "Everything," I replied. She approached the table slowly, scanning the pages without touching them. Her expression didn't break, but something flickered beneath it. A tightening, a small fracture in her practiced composure. "I don't understand why you're upsetting yourself like this," she said. "You're reading too much into ordinary mistakes." "Mistakes repeated with precision," I answered, "and always on days you visited." She straightened. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm acknowledging patterns," I said. "Patterns that have names, dates, and times." For a moment, she didn't speak. She seemed to be weighing her next step, like someone choosing between retreat and attack. But then she reached for the same tired script. "You know, Margaret, stress can distort memory. You've been anxious, and that can make things look different than they are." I looked at her, gently, steadily. "Nothing looks different to me. Everything is clearer than it's been in months." Her jaw tightened again, but she gathered her purse and gave a small, dismissive laugh. "If you want Michael to worry more, that's your choice, but you're creating problems that don't exist." She left quickly, her footsteps sharp down the walkway. When the door closed, I sat down at the table again. I traced the rows of printed text with my finger. Her denial hadn't shaken me. If anything, it confirmed the need for something more than quiet notes and careful watching. It was time to protect myself formally. But before doing anything, I folded the logs neatly and placed them in my drawer, beside the old photographs of my husband. I rested my hand on the wood a long moment, letting the stillness settle. Truth, once gathered, has its own weight. I sat with the pharmacy logs a long while before I could bring myself to move. Not from shock. No. Shock had passed. But from a calm resolve that needed space to settle into my bones. There comes a point in a woman's life when she stops hoping people will change and starts preparing for the moment she must protect herself from them. I had arrived at that point quietly, like stepping onto a different kind of soil, without realizing the ground had shifted. I reached for the old phone book I keep in the drawer beneath the tea towels. People laugh at such books now, but paper remembers what screens sometimes lose. My fingers stopped at the name I expected. Kenneth Bishop. My husband's friend. Our family's lawyer for decades, long before Dana was ever a shadow in our doorway. A man who once drank coffee in our kitchen and discussed the future with a gentleness rare in someone trained to fight with words. When I called, he recognized my voice before I finished my name. "Margaret," he said, his tone warm but edged with alertness. "It's been a while. What's going on?" "I need advice," I replied, quietly. He didn't ask for details on the phone. He simply told me to come in that afternoon. That, in itself, was kindness. He understood that I would not have reached out unless the ground under my feet felt unsteady. The walk to his office took longer than it once did. My steps are slower these days, but not uncertain. I moved with the care of someone who knows each action matters. The streets were busy with errands and school children and the ordinary noise of life, but I felt as if I were walking inside a glass corridor untouched by the rush of others. Kenneth greeted me at the door himself. His hair is grayer than I remember, his shoulders stooped a bit, but his eyes carry the same sincerity I trusted years ago. He led me to his office. Wood panels, worn leather chairs, the faint smell of old books and dust, and waited until I sat before asking anything. "What happened?" he asked gently. I placed the folded pharmacy logs on his desk. He opened them with the precision of someone used to reading important truths hidden inside unremarkable documents. As he scanned the lines, his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Concern replaced curiosity. Then concern shifted into something firmer. "Margaret," he said slowly, "these entries were not made by accident." "I know," I replied. "And you didn't give anyone access?" "I've never touched the portal." He nodded, absorbing this, then leaned back in his chair. "This looks intentional, coordinated." He hesitated, choosing his words with the care of a man who knows the weight they carry. "Has anyone been pressuring you about your health? Your independence? Your legal affairs?" I thought of Dana's soft voice, her hovering concern, her insistence that I was slipping, the way she touched my cabinet without my asking, the way she spoke for me when Michael was near. "Yes," I said, "not openly, but enough." He steepled his fingers. "These kinds of patterns often precede attempts to obtain power of attorney or access to accounts." His voice softened. "I'm sorry, Margaret." "I'm not," I said. "At least not anymore. I'd rather see clearly than be loved blindly." He gave a small smile, the kind meant for someone facing something difficult with dignity. Then he slid a folder toward me. "I'd like to put a few protections in place. Nothing dramatic. Just safeguards in case this behavior continues. You'll remain fully in control, but it will make it much harder for anyone to intervene without your consent." I listened carefully as he explained, a formal note on my medical directives, a restriction on financial access, a record of my current mental competency filed quietly but officially. Ordinary measures, yet powerful when used as a shield. He placed a final sheet before me. "And this," he said, "documents that you sought legal support today. If anything escalates, we'll have a record that you were aware and proactive." My hand didn't tremble as I signed. There was no fear left in it. When I walked out of his office, the world looked the same. Cars passing, people talking, leaves blowing down the sidewalk. But I felt different. Less alone, more anchored. Age may bring frailty, but it also brings a kind of inner steel that cannot be stolen. At home, I placed the signed documents beside the logs in my drawer. Then I rested my hands on the cool wooden surface and let myself breathe. I had shifted the balance, quietly. The following days passed in a quiet that felt almost deliberate, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I moved through my routines: tea in the morning, a slow walk around the yard, a bit of dusting in the late afternoon. But everything felt sharper, more defined. Awareness does that. It turns each gesture into something observed, something noted, something held up to the light. Dana didn't come by for 2 days. That alone told me more than any visit could have. She was calculating, pulling back just enough to appear innocent, waiting to see whether I would reveal what I knew or retreat into the uncertainty she had been trying to cultivate around me. But I didn't call, and I didn't stumble. I simply lived, quietly, with purpose. On the 3rd day, as I finished folding laundry, I heard her car door close outside. Her footsteps approached, slower than usual, almost cautious. When I opened the door, she stood there with a tight smile, holding a basket of folded towels I knew hadn't come from my home. "I thought I'd help with the linens," she said brightly. "You mentioned the other day that they were too heavy to lift." "I don't recall mentioning that," I answered. Her smile thinned. "Well, you must have. I remember clearly." But the certainty in her voice was brittle. She stepped inside, her eyes skimming the room, looking for anything out of place, anything she could interpret as evidence of frailty. She walked toward the cabinet again, pausing in that subtle way she thought I didn't notice. I watched her reflection in the glass of the framed photo on the wall, her shoulders tightening, her fingers brushing the edge of the door. "Don't open that," I said gently. She froze, hand hovering, then lowered it with an awkward laugh. "I was just checking that everything's organized. You know how easily things get mixed up." "Nothing is mixed up," I replied. "I've been keeping track." Her eyes flicked toward the table, toward the small stack of papers I hadn't bothered to hide. Not the full set, just enough to suggest that I no longer lived in the fog she wished to place around me. She swallowed, a small, dry sound. "Margaret," she began, choosing her tone carefully, "Michael and I have been talking. We really think it's time we helped more formally. Maybe we should handle your medications. Make sure they're taken properly." Properly. As if I were a child unable to lift a cup. "I've already put new measures in place," I said. "From now on, any changes to my prescriptions require my presence." Her face stiffened. "What do you mean, measures?" "Safeguards," I said simply. "On my accounts, on my medical records." She stared at me, and for the first time, the mask slipped. I saw irritation, real, unfiltered, flash across her features before she swallowed it again. "You went to a lawyer," she said, not asking, but accusing. "I went to someone who understands how to protect an old woman's autonomy," I replied. She stepped back slightly, as if recalculating. "You think we want to hurt you? Michael loves you." "I love you." I looked at her, this young woman with steady hands and shifting eyes, and felt a strange sadness. Not fear, not anger, just the quiet ache of realizing someone had chosen control over kindness. "I believe you love what you think I can give you," I said. "But love for me? No. You would have needed to look at me to feel that." Her breath hitched. Just a breath. But it was enough. She set the towel basket down too hard on the table, forcing a smile. "You're making this complicated. There's no need to involve lawyers or pharmacies. We're family. Let us take responsibility." "Responsibility is earned," I said, "and you've shown me who you are." A long silence followed. She didn't move. Neither did I. The house seemed to listen. Then she picked up her purse. "I should go," she said sharply. "Michael will be worried." I opened the door for her. She didn't meet my eyes as she left. When the house was quiet again, I returned to the table and wrote down every detail of her visit, her words, her pauses, the tremor in her voice she tried to hide. I rested my pen and let the silence settle around me. The line between concern and control had never been clearer. The next morning, I woke with a strange lightness in my chest. Not relief, not victory, but a steadiness that comes when the truth finally stops hiding. I moved through the house with unhurried purpose, opening curtains, folding blankets, letting sunlight touch corners that had felt dim these past weeks. Even the air felt different, as if it acknowledged the small boundaries I had quietly reclaimed. After breakfast, I sat at the table with my notebook and a cup of tea, considering what needed to happen next. Watching was no longer enough. Counting pills, noting times, those had been the steps of someone uncovering a pattern. But protecting myself would require something firmer, something more deliberate. I needed control restored where it had been quietly eroded. I called the pharmacy first. The young technician recognized my voice, and after a moment of polite verification, she confirmed the change Kenneth had arranged. All modifications to my prescriptions now required my physical presence and signature. No remote cancellations, no digital adjustments. The relief I felt was small but tangible, like a lock sliding into place. After that, I arranged something else, something more immediate. A simple, alarmed lockbox. Nothing dramatic, just a clean metal container with a code only I knew. The delivery arrived midday, the box light but strong in my hands. I placed it inside the cabinet, exactly where the old bottle once sat in plain view. This time, when I closed the cabinet door, the click felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost. In the afternoon, the notification system went live. A quiet, discreet service Kenneth had set up. From now on, any login attempt, any inquiry, any pharmacy action under my name would trigger an alert to my phone and to his office. A small measure, but profound in its implication. I was no longer alone in this. Just as I finished testing the alert with a mock login, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Not Michael's, Dana's. The rhythm of her steps was unmistakable. Quick, controlled, each one placed with purpose. When I opened the door, she greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought I'd stop by," she said. "Make sure you're doing all right." "I'm managing," I replied. Her gaze flicked toward the cabinet almost immediately. An involuntary movement, like a habit she had not yet unlearned. She walked into the kitchen and reached for the faucet, talking about nothing in particular: the weather, a neighbor's new dog, a sale at the grocery store. It was the talk of someone trying to sound casual, while her eyes kept sliding toward the place where she believed vulnerability lived. "Do you need help organizing your medication this week?" she asked, with exaggerated gentleness. I know it's been confusing with the changes. There's no confusion, I said. Everything is secure now. The word secure caught her attention. She turned slightly, her smile stiffening. Secure? What does that mean? It means things are no longer left out, I replied, or accessible to anyone but me. Her eyes narrowed, just a breath, before she smoothed her expression. Margaret, you don't trust me? Trust? Such a large word, especially coming from someone who had treated my life like a set of drawers needing rearrangement. I trust what people show me, I said softly, not what they insist I should believe. For the first time, she didn't bother masking her irritation. It rose like a thin heat beneath her voice. You're making things more difficult than they need to be. Michael thinks. He thinks what you tell him, I interrupted gently. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She reached for the cabinet out of instinct, and when her fingers brushed against the new lockbox, she froze. It was as if she'd touched a boundary she hadn't expected. What's this? She asked. A measure, I said. For my safety. She stepped back, her face pale with something between anger and surprise. You're being paranoid. I'm being careful, I said. There's a difference. For a moment, she seemed at a loss. No script ready, no practiced expression to lean on. Then she gathered her things abruptly and announced she had errands to run. When she left, the house felt lighter again. I sat with my tea, listening to the quiet clock on the wall. I felt older, yes, but not weaker. Awareness had become something like armor, and for the first time in many weeks, I felt the smallest pulse of peace move through me, gentle but sure. 2 days passed without a single visit from Dana, which in itself was a message. Silence can be a retreat, but it can also be preparation. I didn't wait to discover which one it was. I moved through my house with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months, checking the lockbox each morning, reviewing the alerts on my phone as though I were tending a small garden of truth. Nothing had been touched. No unauthorized logins. No pharmacy inquiries. A stillness before something inevitable. That afternoon, as I was watering the plants by the window, my phone buzzed. Not a call, an alert. An attempted login to my pharmacy account from an unrecognized device. The message appeared calmly, without drama, as if it were notifying me of rain. The second notification followed immediately. A copy had been sent to Kenneth's office. I felt neither fear nor shock, only a slow exhale, like realizing you were right to trust your instincts all along. Minutes later, the phone rang. Kenneth's measured voice filled the room. Margaret, we received the alert. Are you safe? I am, I said. Quite safe. Good. I'll contact the pharmacy's compliance officer and file a report. This pattern is no longer subtle. It's deliberate, and it's documented. He paused. You've done exactly what you needed to do. After we ended the call, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, letting my fingers rest on the counter. The afternoon light fell in soft, slanted lines across the floor, and in that quiet glow, I realized something. I wasn't bracing anymore. I was witnessing. Half an hour later, as if the alert had pulled her from wherever she was, Dana appeared at my door. She didn't knock loudly. She never does when she's uncertain. Her smile was thin, her breath slightly quick. I was nearby, she said, stepping inside. Thought I'd check on you. I nodded, neither inviting nor resisting. She glanced around the room as though expecting something to reveal itself. Have you been feeling dizzy? She asked. Michael said you sounded off yesterday. I sounded exactly as I meant to, I replied. Her eyes sharpened. Well, if you're struggling, we can take over the medication entirely. It might be safer. Safer for whom? I asked, my voice quiet but unshaken. She blinked, thrown off. What do you mean? I reached into my pocket and held up my phone, the screen still displaying the alert. There was an attempt to access my account today. I'm notified now, immediately. She stared at the screen, her expression tightening, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the tension underneath. You think I did that? I think, I said gently, that patterns rarely lie. Her shoulders stiffened. You're overreacting. Technology glitches all the time. It wasn't a glitch, I said, and it wasn't an accident. For a moment, silence wrapped around us like a thin sheet of ice. She pressed her lips together, then muttered something about errands and hurried out the door, her footsteps sharp, betraying the calm she wanted me to believe. When she drove away, I sat down at the table and wrote everything in my notebook. Her arrival, her fear, her denial, her too quick exit. My handwriting was steady, steadier than it had been in weeks. The truth, once protected, grows stronger. Kenneth called early the next morning. His voice was calm, but beneath it, I could hear the firmness of someone who had drawn a line on my behalf. Margaret, he said. The pharmacy's compliance team reviewed the alert. They confirmed the login attempt was unauthorized. I've filed the report. A social worker will reach out to you today. I thanked him, though the words felt small compared to the steadiness he had given me these past days. After the call, I sat for a while with my hands around a warm cup of tea, letting the steam brush my face. Age teaches you to appreciate heat in the smallest forms. Tea, sunlight, honesty. By mid-morning, the social worker, a woman named Rachel, arrived. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes that didn't skim over me as if looking for frailty. She sat at the table, listened without interrupting, and studied the logs and my notes with a seriousness that made me feel seen rather than evaluated. You've been documenting this thoroughly, she said. That makes a significant difference. I had to, I replied. People stop believing older women when things go missing. They assume it's the mind, never the environment. She nodded. Unfortunately, that's true. But what you've gathered is clear and intentional. The word hung in the room, steady and undeniable. She explained that the report would move forward, not aggressively, but formally. Safeguards would be recommended. My medical chart would note that interference had occurred. Orders would be documented. Every step from now on would leave a trace. As she spoke, I felt no triumph, only a quiet return of something I hadn't felt in months. Dignity. Not given, not asked for. Restored. After she left, I walked to the living room and opened the curtains wide. Light flooded in, bright and unapologetic. I stood there for a moment, letting it wash over my hands. They tremble a bit now, age does that, but they still remember how to hold truth steady. Late in the afternoon, Michael called. His voice was tight, uneasy. "Mom," he said, "Dana told me you're getting social services involved. What's going on?" His question wasn't angry, just uncertain. I could almost hear him rubbing his forehead the way he did when he was a boy struggling with homework. There were irregularities, I said. The pharmacy confirmed it. I needed support. There was a long pause. Dana said you're confused, that you might be imagining things. I let the silence settle before I answered. I'm many things, Michael. Tired, old, slower than I used to be. But confused is not one of them. He didn't respond right away. The pause stretched, soft but strained. Mom, Can I come by tomorrow? Without Dana? Yes, I said gently. I think that would be good. When the call ended, I looked around my quiet house. The photographs on the shelves, the chair my husband once favored, the kitchen where so much of my life had unfolded. Everything felt the same, and yet something had shifted. The weight in the air had eased. Near dinner time, I checked my phone. No new alerts, no attempts, no intrusions. For the first evening in weeks, I felt entirely inside my own life again. And the quiet, for once, felt like a friend instead of a warning. Michael arrived the next morning, looking older than he had any right to at 43. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly rounded, as if unsure whether he was welcome. When I opened the door, he gave me a smile that didn't hide the worry in his eyes. "Mom," he said softly. "Come in, Michael." He stepped inside and looked around, as though trying to see the house through my eyes. His gaze lingered on the table, on my notebook, on the papers stacked neatly beside it. He swallowed. "Dana said things are complicated." "They are," I replied, "but not in the way she told you." He sat down slowly, waiting for me to speak. I poured us tea, the simple ritual grounding me. When I finally sat across from him, the morning light brushed across his face, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who came running to me with skinned knees and secrets too big for his small pockets. "Michael," I said, "I want you to listen without interrupting. Not because I'm angry, but because the truth needs space." He nodded, eyes lowered. I told him everything, not dramatically, not accusingly, just plainly, the way truth prefers to be told. The missing pills, the pharmacy cancellations, the timestamps, the login attempts. The way Dana shifted my belongings, shaped stories about my forgetfulness, spoke for me when I was perfectly capable of speaking myself. I watched his face change, confusion, disbelief, then a slow, painful understanding. When I finished, he pressed a hand to his forehead. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said gently. "And because she worked hard to make sure you wouldn't." He closed his eyes. "She said you were slipping, that you misplaced things, that you got confused easily." "I know," I replied, "and you wanted to believe her. It's easier to trust the person who speaks the loudest in your daily life than the one who speaks the quiet truth." He shook his head, eyes shining. "Mom, I never wanted you to feel alone." "I didn't feel alone," I said. "Not once I understood what was happening, but I did feel dismissed." He winced at that. "I'm so sorry." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. My fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion, long held in restraint. "Michael, love doesn't mean we notice everything. It means that when the truth finally arrives, we don't turn away from it." He nodded slowly, his grip tightening around my hand. After a long pause, he asked, "What happens now?" "Nothing dramatic," I said. "There are protections in place. The pharmacy and the lawyer know. A social worker has documented the situation. I'm safe." "And Dana," he whispered. "That's for you to decide," I replied. "But decisions made in the dark tend to harm everyone. You deserve to make yours in full light." He sat back, staring at the table as though seeing his life from a new angle. The silence between us was not heavy. It was honest. "Mom," he said finally, "I want to hear everything she never let you say." So I told him, quietly, without bitterness. And as I spoke, I felt the room shift, not because the past had changed, but because the truth had finally found its listener. When he left that afternoon, he hugged me tightly, not the careful hug meant for someone fragile, but one filled with recognition. For the first time in a long while, I felt understood. The days that followed felt quieter, though not in the uneasy way of earlier weeks. This quiet had weight, direction. It was the hush that comes when truth has stepped into the room and refuses to leave. I moved through my routines with a steadiness that surprised even me. My heart beat calmly. My steps felt sure. And the house, my house, seemed to exhale with me. Michael called each evening. Not rushed calls from his car or whispered ones from the living room, while Dana hovered in the background, but full, unhurried conversations. He asked questions gently, trying to understand not just the events but the slow erosion that had preceded them. He apologized often, too often, and I reminded him every time that apology is not what I needed. Awareness was enough. On the fourth day, he arrived again, alone. His shoulders were straighter this time, his expression more resolute. He sat in the same chair as before, looking around my kitchen as if seeing it, truly seeing it, for the first time in months. "I spoke to Dana," he said quietly. I nodded and waited. "She denied everything at first," he continued. "Said you were confused, said you were manipulating the situation, said the lawyer had frightened you into imagining things." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But when I showed her the logs, she froze. And then she got angry. Really angry. I've never seen her like that." I listened without interruption. Women my age learn that silence can be its own truth-telling force. "She said you were trying to destroy our marriage," he added. "She said you were turning me against her." "And what did you say?" I asked. "I said I was finally seeing what I should have seen months ago." His voice cracked, just slightly. "I told her trust is earned, and she hasn't earned it." He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm staying with a friend for now. I need space to think." "That's wise," I said gently. "Clarity needs room." He let out a slow breath, as if releasing something that had been lodged under his ribs. "Mom, I should have seen it. I should have listened to you sooner." "You're listening now," I replied. "That's what matters." He nodded, swallowing hard. "The social worker called me too. She said there are formal steps being taken. Protective measures." His eyes finally met mine. "Will you be all right with all of this? Truly all right?" "I already am," I said. "I've been living in the dark with my eyes wide open. Now there's light. It may hurt at first, but it's still light." He reached across the table and took my hand again, not with the caution of someone afraid I might break, but with a son's steady recognition. "I'm here," he said. "For real this time." After he left, I stood at the window and watched him walk to his car. His steps were slow but certain, like a man beginning to rebuild the ground beneath him. I felt no triumph, only a quiet ache, because endings, even necessary ones, carry their own small sadness. But beneath that sadness was something else, something steadier. A sense that the truth had finally placed its hand on the table between us, saying, "Here, this is where you begin again." I turned back to the kitchen, to the hum of the refrigerator, the warm light pooling on the floor, the simple familiarity of my own breath. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the house return to itself. The house was quiet the next morning, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one that had pressed on me weeks before. This quiet had space in it. Breath. A kind of stillness that didn't demand fear or caution, only acknowledgement. I sat at the table with my tea, watching the steam curl upward like a soft ribbon rising into the morning light. For the first time in a long while, I felt my heartbeat settle into a steady, familiar rhythm. Around noon, Rachel, the social worker, returned for a final visit. She carried a folder, her expression calm but purposeful. "I just wanted to update you," she said, sitting across from me. "Everything is officially documented. Your safeguards are active, and your accounts are protected. If anyone tries to interfere again, the system will respond immediately." "I appreciate that," I said. And I did. Not in the way one appreciates a favor, but in the way a person appreciates a door finally being locked against the wind. She closed the folder gently. "I also spoke with your son. He understands the seriousness now." "He's learning," I said softly. "Sometimes people need to see the whole picture before they recognize the cracks." She smiled. "You've handled all of this with remarkable clarity." "Clarity comes from surviving long enough to stop doubting what you see," I replied. After she left, I stepped outside for a short walk. The trees along the sidewalk were shedding late leaves, gold, rust, a few clinging to summer's green. I shuffled through them, hearing their soft crackle beneath my shoes. Small sounds can remind you that you're still part of the world, still moving forward, even if your bones ache. Michael arrived in the late afternoon. He knocked softly, then opened the door as he used to when he was young, peeking in as if to be sure he wasn't intruding. He held a bag of groceries, but not as an offering of control, only care. "I didn't want you to lift too much," he said. "May I put these away?" "Yes," I said. "You may." We worked side by side in the kitchen, and the simplicity of it, two people placing fruit in bowls, sliding jars onto shelves, felt almost healing. When he finished, he rested his hands on the counter and looked at me. "I've spoken to Dana again," he said quietly. I waited. "She admitted to some things," he continued. "Not directly, not fully, but enough for me to understand who she's been when I wasn't looking." He paused, his eyes clouding. "I don't know what our future looks like, but I know she won't be managing your life again." "That's your decision," I said gently. "Not mine." He nodded. "I just needed you to know I'm not blind anymore." I reached out and touched his hand. Seeing clearly is the beginning of healing, not the end. For a moment, he looked as though he might cry, but instead he squeezed my hand and let out a long, unsteady breath. "I'm sorry for all the times I didn't listen. I forgave you long before you knew to ask," I said. "We do that. We mothers." After he left, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across my living room. I sat in my favorite chair, the one my husband used to warm before me, and let the quiet gather again. But this quiet felt earned, claimed, mine. I thought about all the women my age who live in houses full of memories, but surrounded by people who mistake age for weakness. It's an old story, older than any of us. But sometimes, even in these late chapters of our lives, we find our voice again, not loud, not sharp, but certain. And certainty, I've learned, is a kind of freedom. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle hum of my own breath. It wasn't victory I felt. It wasn't revenge. It was something simpler, something steadier. Dignity, returned to its rightful place. Before going to bed, I wrote one final line in my notebook. I remained myself through all of it. Then I turned off the light, and the darkness felt peaceful, not threatening. If this story touched you, dear reader, let your heart leave a trace. Share your thoughts. And if you'd like to walk through more stories with me, follow along.